Welcome to The Other Side of Medicine, a trusted source for education, not medication, for 35 years. In every episode of The Other Side of Medicine, we deliver health information your doctor won't tell you about. My guests are the nation's leading health experts in science-based natural medicine, physicians, authors, researchers, and clinicians. We believe natural medicine should be first, drugs and surgery last, and so we promise to deliver you the next generation of health information built on three principles: common sense, science, and cooperation with nature. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Krystosik, and you are listening to The Other Side of Medicine, the side of medicine that your doctor won't tell you about. But here on this podcast, we share with you information that will literally transform your health and your life and help you to become independently healthy. And so we have a guest with us tonight who's an expert in spirulina, and you'll learn all about it if you don't know about what spirulina is, but it's a superfood, and it's been lauded as one of the most potent superfoods on the planet. And I'm going to let Lance Leonard introduce himself and tell you about his background. So Lance, welcome to The Other Side of Medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Krystosik. I'm super excited to be here. And also just to let people know that there's something out there as fantastic as spirulina that is from Mother Nature. So
tell us a little bit about actually what spirulina is, first of all, for our listening audience who maybe have not heard about it before.
Well, in order to do that, I'm just going to tell you a little story about my involvement with it. It dates back quite a ways because my mentor, Dr. Christopher Hills, started researching this whole area of microalgae back in the 50s. And he was doing that with a Japanese microbiologist. And their goal at the time was to look for foods they could feed starving people with. And they spent quite a bit of time researching chlorella, about 10 years. And in the early 60s, when they came across a scientific paper about spirulina, they realized, chlorella is great, but spirulina, it's in a class by itself. So they shifted their whole, in fact, they even changed the name of their organization. It was called the Chlorella International Union. It was a group of scientists worldwide. They were all interested in this topic. They shifted it to Microalgae International because they realized that chlorella wasn't the only thing they were going to be researching. So they gradually and sometimes more quickly shifted that focus to pretty much be spirulina 100%. And the more they researched...
Speaking of which, you had mentioned that it's a microalgae. Recently, it's been actually classified as a bacterium. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that's changed?
Yes, that's a great point. Originally, they called it blue-green algae and microalgae. And what they realized was that it didn't quite fit into the category. And so there was a time many decades ago that, and our involvement dates back to about 1980, but our mentor back to the 50s. But there was a time many decades ago when they changed the classification. They called it a nuclear plant. And nuclear plant was supposed to be a special category of plants that were somehow in between a plant and an animal. So we used to joke about it back then, and we'd tell people, look, it's the only safe nuclear plant you can have in your house. And of course, everybody got a good laugh out of that. But then it changed again, and they said, no, this is a cyanobacteria. So it's a special category of bacteria. But, for us who have been studying it, working with people, working with doctors, scientists, for all these decades, we've gotten to the point where we don't care what they call it anymore. We just know it's amazing. And I'm sure we'll talk more about why that is so. So that's what it is.
I'd like to have you talk some more about Dr. Christopher Hills, because he was the one that spearheaded this company, correct?
He didn't spearhead our company, but his company is how we got started, my wife and I, back about 1980. So, 45 years plus ago. And, we got involved because at the time, spirulina, nobody had heard of it really. And right about then, there was an article that came out in a tabloid called Safe Diet Pill. And it was all about how you could lose weight with spirulina. And of course, it went crazy and people suddenly realized this is good stuff. And then what happened next were a bunch of companies jumped into business selling it. Besides, Christopher had started a company. Just to back up a little, he'd spent 10 years working with different world governments, trying to get them to see, yes, this really is good stuff. You could feed people with it. And their goal, the scientists, their idea was, why do we have all these people in the world starving when we've got this spirulina naturally growing? For instance,
actually, you bring that up, Lance, and the United Nations at one point called spirulina the food of the future. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's a good time to talk about it because, we've heard various things about people trying to tell us we're going to be eating insects or something like that. And of course, that's completely unnecessary. Even today, the big problems with food are more distribution than the amount of food. But when you look at spirulina and you realize what a broad spectrum of nutrition it has in it, there is no reason for anybody to starve. There's enough spirulina growing in the lakes in Africa to feed that whole continent right now. That's just naturally what's happening. It's just not being harvested. But what we do today is we grow it in man-made ponds. But the UN called it the food of the future because they realized this is the most concentrated food they'd ever seen. There is no other food that has as broad of a spectrum of nutrition as spirulina. Oh, sure, you can find certain ingredients that this food has more of this food has more of that, but no other food has so many different things in it that we know of anyway, as spirulina. And so as such, it covers a lot of bases because a lot of times, as you know very well, I'm sure, if you're missing one little mineral or one vitamin, you're deficient in something, it causes a whole cascade of problems that end up over time creating bigger problems. So when you've got enough of these things in the body, then you're going to avoid a lot of problems. And spirulina can help people do that, especially when you're on the go and you don't have time to figure out every little thing you're eating. It becomes so complicated. And this is so simple. You just add this green powder to your diet. And, it's not a magic bullet, but it can almost seem that way because it does so many things in the body.
Well, Lance, I want to just interrupt for a second, but, here on the other side of medicine, we tell people that food is the best medicine. And if any food fits that category at the top of the list, spirulina is right there because it has so many nutrients that body needs, everything that we need. Plus, it has compounds in it that nature has provided that are what we call phytochemicals. And these are plant compounds. And I want you to talk about the phycocyanin and the content of it in your particular product compared to the other products on the market. And so if you kind of delve into that a little bit, I think it's really important because we're getting into an area that spirulina has these special compounds that are in such high concentration, like the phycocyanin, that are very, very helpful, very beneficial. They act as antioxidants. They help to detoxify the body and on and on and on.
That's right. Absolutely correct. And, one last little thing I want to add to this United Nations thing, you might ask, well, if they said that and it's so great, why isn't everybody eating it? And, what I'd say about that is it takes time for people to change their diet, especially diet, because people have a lot of emotional connection to what they're eating. They want to eat often the way they were raised, even if they know it's not the best way to eat. So sometimes, and I think what we're realizing today that simple is better. Nature knows what it's doing. The less processed the food is, the better. And so spirulina fits into all that. And just to cap that little part of the conversation, I'll say that right now, the predictions are for spirulina worldwide. The amount of it consumed is predicted to, depending on who you talk to, somewhere between 2 to 5 times as much in the next 5 to 10 years. Worldwide, they're looking at a huge boon. And I think these things go in cycles. When we introduced it to the Western world, I don't mean to sound like I'm bragging, but our mentor really was responsible to a large degree for that. And that's who we worked with. That's Christopher Hills I'm speaking of. When that happened, it was almost like it was a fad. It went crazy for a few years, and then it sort of faded away. But now what's happened between then and now is a whole lot of science has happened, a whole lot of research. I mean, on just about any condition you can think of, you can find research with spirulina connected to that if you look. And so people are starting to realize, this stuff is really amazing. Now, those of us who've been taking it for 40 years, we know it's amazing, but not most people haven't. And so I think we're in a process right now where it's going to become mainstream because people are going to realize, we need good nutrition to do everything, to have a good life. It's a foundation. But to get your,
a lot of people that have been using it have been the less than 10% of the population who have been cognizant and aware of the benefits of superfoods like spirulina. But as you said, now, because of the internet, because of communication channels that have opened up, there's a lot more people they're learning about the benefits of, the foods like spirulina. And so we're really, thankful that we have a company like yours. I've been using spirulina since back in the early 70s, like 71, 72. I was using spirulina every single day. And I remember one of the first gentlemen that introduced me to spirulina. He brought on some spirulina. He had a little, one of the little hippie sacks that you wear on your belt bag. And he brought it out, and he took out a white piece of paper, and he poured some out, and he said, "Look at this one, the one that I'm using." And then he poured out another one on a piece of paper, a white piece of paper, and said, "Look at the difference in the chlorophyll content." It was like almost like a drug dealer trying to show you the difference.
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, But I've been using it for a lot of years, and every single morning, that's my ritual. I start off with spirulina, and we'll talk a little bit later about my new superfood product that I have with fermented green foods as well. And so I blend the two together, and we'll talk about that. But in the meantime, let's get back to the spirulina story.
Well, you mentioned something earlier, which is that the compounds in the spirulina, and that's really the basis for a lot of the research. There really is some amazing stuff. Some of the things you can find in other foods here and there. But just to use the pigments, the phytochemicals as an example, these pigments they're so abundant in spirulina. And what you said about comparing the two, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about a natural food is you can more easily compare. And with spirulina, you can literally look at it and you can see the difference between biolumina spirulina and another brand of spirulina. It's going to be ours is going to be a darker color. And the reason is there's more pigments in it.
Yeah, the other ones look anemic.
That's right. And and they're not necessarily bad. Although I will say there is spirulina from China I would not recommend. But
unless you want to glow in the dark.
Right. You want to glow in the dark, and you want to add a few extra toxins in your body, which is sort of defeating the purpose. But ours is grown in the United States, and it's very, very pure. In fact, we don't know of any more pure than that. But
talk about how, if I may, or you're right now, you want to talk about the compounds. Let's stick on that. Then I want to talk about your growing process because it's really very fascinating. But talk about the compounds there.
So you mentioned phycocyanin, and of all the pigments, we consider that to be like the queen of the pigments. It's the blue pigment. And actually, if you take pure phycocyanin and put it in water and hold it up to light, you can see other colors in it. It's like almost like a spectrum of blue and violet. But these colors, these pigments are important in the diet. Is people nowadays have been hearing a lot about, oh, eat blueberries, are full of antioxidants. The blue pigment. Well, that's a different blue pigment, which is also good for you. And really, if you just pick your foods based on the bright colors, I mean, we all know that food that's really healthy, that's grown well, that, like, let's say you've grown in your own garden, you can see that it looks better than usually what you find at the market. So the same thing is true with spirulina. And that phycocyanin, that stuff has been shown to do things to the neurological system of the body that's very, very powerful. There's research using phycocyanin with Parkinson's disease. That's very promising, for example. We've had people with that disease tell us amazing stories. We're not here to make claims, obviously, because we're not allowed to do that. But I can tell you,
but the research is there. That's the beautiful part about it.
Yes, it is.
In the other side of medicine, we're all about evidence-based natural medicine.
That's right.
And that's why I love spirulina, because there's so much evidence.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we don't have to do that anymore, because we can just say, well, read what these guys said, because they're doing the research. It's been going on now for decades. So that blue pigment is very important for anything to do with the neurological parts of the body, the higher centers. There's the green pigment, chlorophyll. We've all heard about chlorophyll. It's so good for the blood. It's so good for detoxing the body. There's a red pigment in spirulina that's good for many things in the body. There's beta carotene. There's more than one kind of carotenoid in spirulina. These are good for the eyes. They're good for all sorts of things. Also, the immune system, which is another one that the pigments in general tend to support. And the phycocyanin is especially good for the immune system.
Yeah. Speaking of, I don't want to belittle the fact that the phycocyanin, as you said, is the queen of the pigments in this spirulina. It has anti-inflammatory properties that are very significant. And, inflammation is so rampant today in so many people's bodies. And that's really a trigger for so many different kinds of diseases. And as it travels throughout the entire body, whether you're talking about arthritis or dementia, or you're talking about inflammatory bowel diseases, or on and on and on. And the phycocyanin is a very powerful anti-inflammatory agent, but it also helps to detoxify the body and get rid of poisons, and works with the liver and the kidneys as well to get rid of these toxins. And it cooperates with the body. That's the beautiful part about it. It really works with the body's own healing mechanisms.
That's right. And because, as you know, the body wants to get the toxins out. It doesn't want to keep them. That's its natural job, part of its job. But the body also wasn't set up to have the deluge of toxins that we are being exposed to today. So having these extra high quality nutrients is very, very helpful, especially when you look at the lack of nutrients, or I should say the decreased levels of nutrients in a lot of the food that we eat, especially if you're eating a lot of prepackaged and processed food. And of course, today...
point here, Lance, a lot of people think, well, I'll go ahead and I'll eat the average diet everybody else eats, and I'll go and get a multiple vitamin, and that'll cover all my bases. And that's almost a joke anymore, because these multiple vitamins, they're really very, very poor quality. And people, they spend the money like galore on their homes and their cars and their clothes. But when it comes to their body, they skimp, and they look for multiple vitamins that are cheap. And, I'm not averse to, mentioning a brand like Centrum. That's just, it's like a night and day difference between what spirulina provides compared to something like that in a multiple vitamin. And, my grandmother was very wise. She was not educated. She says you can skimp on the clothes that you wear. You can skimp on the house that you live in or the car that you drive, but never skimp on what you put in your mouth. And I thought that was so wise.
Well, that's amazing. That's amazing wisdom from your grandmother, because, when going back in time, not everybody realized that. I think people just didn't think about that. And of course, some of it was taken for granted because there was better food at one time, before the soils were depleted, before the microbiome of the soil was so compromised like it is today. That's wonderful. Your grandmother must have been an amazing person. How lucky you
Speaking
are.
about the microbiome and the gut bacteria, is there evidence for spirulina's ability to help to feed the microorganism besides the fiber that's in it, other compounds?
Yes, there is. Spirulina is an excellent prebiotic. And the difference, of course, between prebiotic and probiotic, I don't have to explain to you. You probably know it better than I do. But just for the listeners, the prebiotic, like you said, is what feeds the beneficial microorganisms in the gut. And the probiotic is what helps keep the balance going there. The prebiotic supports it to stay in balance. And of course, there's other things too. Getting rid of negative bacteria is important too. And in fact, your product I don't even know the details of it yet, but just the fact that it's using fermented ingredients is fantastic, because we know that that's going to support gut health. That's one of the best things. I just, before we got on this call, I had some kimchi and some organic kimchi, and oh my gosh, it was so delicious. And I always feel better when I eat something fermented like that. There's just no comparison.
The key is variety. You want to have a whole plethora of different types of foods, and again, to get that diversity, because each type of microorganism that's beneficial in the gut has a preference towards different colors and different compounds that are in the plants. And so the more diverse your diet is, the more you're going to have these beneficial bacteria that are going to really compound and become more populated inside your gut. And that's why spirulina is so beautiful, because it has all these various pigments and all these colors that you talked about. Yeah. And that's what the bacteria love. They just crave for that.
I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. J, as I like to call you. The thing about it is, today, people are, to some degree, being pushed to go in the opposite direction of what you're talking about and have a more restricted diet. And I understand the reasons for that, because people say, oh, well, if I eat this, then I really react. I can't do gluten or whatever. And as I'm sure you know better than 99% of the people on the planet, it is a lot of the time, I won't say all the time, but a lot of the time, that is because of a compromised gut. It's not because they literally have an allergy to that particular substance. It's because once the gut gets compromised, then all kinds of things start happening. And so by doing what you're suggesting, having that variety, and, that's what spirulina is. It's almost like a mini, variety show when it comes to the nutrients in it, because there's so many different ones in it. But just throw in one quick thing, is because I don't want to forget this, is that the spirulina, it actually helps other things work better.
Sure. Well, just to segue on the whole idea that we really have many people who are reacting to foods, and that whole idea that people are limiting themselves today, and they say they feel better. Well, the reason they feel better, Lance, is because their body's overreacting because of the gut microbiome being disturbed, and because of what we call leaky gut and toxins, because the gut has allowed things to escape from the gut and get into the bloodstream carte blanche without any reservation. The digestive system, when it works properly, opens up the gates, so to speak, and it lets nutrients come in, but then it shuts it back down again.
Right.
Okay, after digestion occurs. Well, with the leaky gut, you're allowing that gate to be open all the time, and these toxic elements that are inside the gut, from the bacteria, from the food, from the environment, they escape into the bloodstream, and they cause people to overreact and have a lot of autoimmune diseases, inflammatory conditions. And so when people restrict themselves, and that's why these diets become so popular today, like the keto diet and the low carb diets and the carnivore diet, is because they're restricting themselves and limiting themselves and getting rid of so many of the foods that their body's now reacting to, which are even healthy foods that they're reacting to, like wheat, which is, if you eat it in its whole plant form, for most people, it's a really healthy food. And by the way, also, it's the toxic way of farming in this country, because when people go to like Europe, for example, and they have the wheat there, even though they may be gluten sensitive, they don't react and they're able to eat the wheat. So it really is there's a bunch of variables that really interplay in this. But once, as you said so astutely, that people are limiting themselves, and they don't have to if they would help to heal the gut. And that's what Spirulina does. That's what my product does. That's what these superfoods do. So, yeah.
So that's a great segue into talking about how our spirulina is grown, because what we're really talking about a lot here is a quality issue. I mean, like you said, you eat bread here and you can't do it. You go to Europe and there's no problem. There's a difference. There's more of a toxic overload here. With glyphosate is, of course, one of the biggest ones that destroys the gut and is used, sadly, here in the U.S. to a large degree on wheat. We hope that's going to be changing, but for now, we've had this for quite some time, and that's only one toxin. There are many, as you know. So one of the things that's important is when you're getting nutrients, you're getting high quality. And with spirulina, spirulina is just like bread. There's Wonder Bread, and then there's organic, fermented whole wheat, bread, and there's quite a difference between the two. And the same thing is true with spirulina. So what we do is every step of the way, the first thing we do is we start with a culture that is the top one in the world, which originated from Africa, which is interesting, the best spirulina in the world. And then we take that and we grow it in triple filtered water. So the water that we use is filtered 3 times to make sure that it's very, very pure. Along the way, we do 40 different tests on a regular basis to everything, the growing environment, the spirulina, all of it is monitored very, very closely. In fact, I was talking with somebody today who's been in the world of spirulina for a while, and he was shocked when I told him that we can actually test to the nanoscale, which is, as far as I know, we don't know of another farm that does that. We have the certifications our farm has are off the charts. You don't get them unless you really, really know what you're doing. So, for example, we monitor for heavy metals. Every 10 days, we do another test. We monitor for other microorganisms in the ponds, and we do that daily. So, and even though spirulina, when the pond is set up properly, it's difficult for anything else to grow in the pond. So that's not truly a big issue. But one of the reasons we do it, maybe you'll laugh, but one of the reasons we do it is because so many people are worried about that. So we just want to reassure them, look, we test it every day. We know that it's pure. So there are many, many tests like that are going on. We test for the phycocyanin levels. Every single batch of spirulina that we put out has been tested for that. So we know it's always over 20% phycocyanin content, which is off the charts high. And why is it high?
What is the average spirulina phycocyanin content? Just for our listening audience benefit. I'm quite aware of it, but go ahead.
That's a good question. And to be honest, I can't tell you the exact average number worldwide, but from what we've observed, most spirulina is somewhere around at best half of that. A lot of it's less than 10%, but 10% is probably average. I'm gonna guess. I'd love to hear anything you know about it too, though, if you know of another number. But in any case, it's quite quite a bit lower than what we have, and it's noticeable.
So yours is twice the amount of, let's say, in general, the average.
At least, yeah, at least.
Yeah,
And
that's amazing when you consider, again, we're talking about food as being medicine, and phycocyanidin has so much research behind it. It's literally medicine to help to heal the body. So people are getting twice as much of that compound. That's only one of the compounds.
That's right.
There's others as well.
And we often are above 20%. We've had it as high as just under 25%.
Wow.
So, usually we're somewhere in between those two numbers. We don't put anything out there that's lower than 20%.
What about the environment around, the facility?
That's a good question too. We all know there's a lot of different sources of toxins today, including the air, not just the water. Even though spirulina is grown in water, the air affects it too. Spirulina is great for cleaning up environments, which is a good thing, except you don't want to eat spirulina that's been cleaning up toxins because it's basically taking those in. So you want it to be grown in a clean environment. Now, some people are growing their spirulina inside closed systems. We don't think that's as good because there are many things that spirulina gets from the sunlight. And the more direct sunlight, the better. Artificial light's not the same. Part of the reason that our spirulina has the abundance of pigments is the natural sunlight. It's a reaction to that. So we grow ours outside, but we very, very carefully monitor it. But the location where we grow it is a place where there really is no industry at all. There's nothing going on. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's in a place where really you can't do much out there because it gets so hot. It's out in the desert east of San Diego, where the temperatures in the summertime range from about 110 to 130. The last time I visited the farm, it was 118 degrees that day. And that was typical day out there. Now, the good news about that, besides the fact that there's not much else around to pollute it, the good news is also that the spirulina loves those hot temperatures. And in fact, that's one of the secrets of how we get so much high phycocyanin is the high amount of sunlight and the high temperatures.
Wonderful. So, speaking of the high temperatures, there's a lot of people out there who are saying, well, our particular product, whether it's spirulina or chlorella, we keep our product so that when it's processed, the temperature is not going to get over 110 degrees because we know the enzymes start to get destroyed anywhere between 110 and 115 degrees. And so talk a little bit about that with spirulina and keeping the enzymes intact, even at the high temperatures that it's grown in.
That's a really good point. There are people out there talking about that. There's a few things that people talk about that are not actually accurate about spirulina, but let's talk about that one first. So the thing about spirulina is, over the decades that we've been studying it, we're continually amazed at how it defies categorization. It defies the rules that are normal for other organisms. So, for example, it thrives in extremely hot temperatures. In its natural environment, if there's a drought, the spirulina will actually dry out on the rocks, and it stays alive when it's dried. So in other words, when the conditions are returned for it to come to life, it'll come back to life. It can stay in that dormant state. Well, scientists have found spirulina that is literally hundreds of years old, dormant, and that will come back to life. So we've learned what exactly it can do in terms of what it can take in terms of staying alive. It's important to us that we're selling a live product. There are some companies out there saying, oh, ours is better because it's wet when we sell it to you. And actually, nothing could be further from the truth. One of the reasons we dry ours very quickly. It's a flash dryer. The temperature gets actually quite high, but only for a fraction of a second. And what we found is that the spirulina is still alive when we do it that way. Now, you might think, well, why do it like that? Why not just let it dry more slowly? The reason is, if you dry it slowly at lower temperatures, as soon as you start as soon as you take it out of the ponds and start the process, which there's a few steps, you have to rinse it first and then you dry it. As soon as you start doing that, the phycocyanin levels, among other things, but we're most concerned about the phycocyanin levels because we know how important that is. They start dropping immediately. I mean, we're talking like minutes make a difference in the levels of phycocyanin in the pond versus out of the pond. So the faster you dry it, the more of that phycocyanin you're preserving. Now, to your question about enzymes, when the spirulina is still alive, it isn't, the enzymes don't get destroyed. And you might think, well, how is that? How can that be? Well, again, it's one of those things. Spirulina does not fit into the categories of other organisms, where normally with other foods, that would be an extremely valid concern. In fact, we worked with one company that uses infrared light to dry food instead of freeze drying. And the reason they do it is because it's quicker, less energy intensive, and more nutrients are preserved that way. So all of these things become important in how they're done. And especially if you want a premium product. And what we're delivering is beyond anything else that's out there. And we've been doing it for a long, long time, many decades. So that's, I don't know if that answers that question, but
no, it does really well. I want to shift to talking about how athletes love to use spirulina because it helps them to increase their performance and in their ability to do intense workouts more, because spirulina helps to get rid of the byproducts of lactic acid. A lot of people think lactic acid is bad and lactate is not good, but we need that when we're doing anaerobic exercise, if we're doing intense exercising, and we need that. That's why athletes love spirulina, because they have the ability to get rid of the byproducts, which are acidic, and hydrogen ions are produced as a byproduct of the lactic acid. And people get, this burn when they, do athletic performance for high intensity, and taking spirulina helps to minimize that. I go out and I play full court basketball, and I don't have the problems that young people have at 76 years old. I'm playing with 20-year-olds full court basketball, and they're complaining that their muscles ache and their muscles are burning, and I don't have that problem at 76 because I've been using spirulina for so long. And so it helps to clear out the lactic acid and the hydrogen ions so that you don't get that burn, and you can get the energy, but you don't get the burn.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's amazing the number of different benefits that come from eating spirulina. It's not just human athletes. We have people who use it with their very high-end race horses and swear that it helps their horses to perform better and recover from injuries if they have them, and hopefully not get them as often. We have people with dogs and cats, in fact, ourselves included, who've used the spirulina for years with them. Of course, before humans started eating it in a big way, or at least in Western culture, let's say, they used it a lot in Japan to feed fish because it makes the fish turn beautiful colors. The pink flamingos in Africa, that's where their color comes from, is the pigments in spirulina. So there are many, there really aren't that many things that cannot benefit from it. Even plants benefit from it. I always tell people, look, if you made your smoothie and you've got some residue in your blender, don't just rinse it out and put it down the drain. Give it to your houseplants, because it's actually quite good for them too, and in your garden too. So the list goes on, but absolutely performance, athletic performance,
energy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Energy. One of the reasons is glycogen. Glycogen is something that's normally not gotten from plants. And you could say, well, this isn't a plant. Well, you might be right. It's sort of in between, but the truth is it provides that glycogen to the body, which normally isn't there unless you eat it in an animal protein. And then of course, your body has to do a lot of work to get it. The rhamnose, which is it's a carbohydrate that's what's called biologically active, and it actually helps to deliver other nutrients more easily and quickly into the body. And that's also a component of spirulina. It's a very, very rare carbohydrate.
Sure.
All of these.
Talk about the SOD, the superoxide dismutase in spirulina as well.
Amazing antioxidant. Many things happen as a result of having SOD in the body. When we talk about antioxidants, we circle back to that whole thing about inflammation. And, that is at the root of virtually all disease is associated with inflammation these days. Scientists are realizing that more and more. And, there's maybe some disagreement about what causes what, but we know that inflammation is associated with it. And, inflammation is okay in little doses, but when you have chronic inflammation, in other words, the body is continually in a state of inflamed circumstances, then that
like you said, Lance, we need the inflammatory response when we have acute injury.
Right.
But then the body goes into repair mode and then it shuts down. But if you have that chronic inflammatory response going on, then you're going to end up with chronic disease. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier with the leaky gut. And many people are beginning to learn. There's so much research. There's volumes and volumes of research about how the gut is the grand central station of the body, not only where toxins can get absorbed into the bloodstream from the leaky gut, but where nutrients are absorbed and distributed throughout the entire body. And you want to have the nutrients absorbed, but you want to shut down the toxins from getting in the body, because the toxins would cause inflammation.
Yes. And that's, one of the things about what you just said that really strikes me is that circles back to things we were talking about earlier, because you've got to address the root cause. Otherwise, you're just throwing Band-Aids on things. You need, if you say, oh, I've got this inflammation going on, and then you take some kind of a drug to mask the effects, you might get some temporary relief. But if you don't deal with the cause of the inflammation, then you're really not, you're in the long run, you're not going to benefit yourself. Not to mention, of course, the side effects of drugs.
Yeah, so, the anti-inflammatory drugs also damage the lining of the gut, which actually causes more inflammation, and it makes the leaky gut even worse. Oh, so, right. We're getting close to the end, and I really wanted to talk about how I personally use the Spirulina from Biolumina from your company. And I've been just so thankful to come across your company. I was introduced to it many, many years ago from Marcia Miner and Tom Katalski, dear friends of mine. And they really enlightened me about Christopher Hill and how his products and your segue into, the benefits of the Spirulina, it goes on. And so I've been using it for years and years and years. And I have more energy at 76 than China has rice, Lance. And I really, my mental cognition is as sharp as a whip. And, I sleep like a baby. And it's really a tribute to Spirulina and the foods that I eat on a regular basis. And that's why I created my food supplement. And it's a food again, because food is the best medicine. And here it is. It's called the microbiome food. What it does is it feeds the beneficial bacteria inside the gut. the beneficial bacteria, we call it the microbiome. And so this particular powdered supplement, you mix it with water, and I use it every single day. And I actually take this 1 scoop of my powder, and I take a heaping tablespoon of the spirulina from Biolumina, and I mix the two together. And then I have a delicious recipe that you can mix it with fresh squeezed lemon or chocolate, cocoa powder and cinnamon, and it absolutely tastes delicious. And it's just a wonderful way to start your day with and to get a power boost from the morning. And it just sets your day. It sets the tone for the rest of the day. And I call it a supernatural morning, one of my routines that I do every single day.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to try it myself. It's amazing how many people have told us that adding our Biolumina spirulina to another product or food actually makes everything work even better. And that's one of the things we've noticed is the synergy, you might call it, between the ingredients. I want to say something before I forget, which is that, we've been talking about Biolumina spirulina a lot, but we haven't mentioned the name of our company is New Phoenix Rising. And when people go there, and I'm sure you'll give them a link somewhere in this video so they can go there, that's where they can go get it. And I also want to say that
we'll put a link for how they can get the New Phoenix Rising spirulina in the comments of the podcast.
And I want to let people know that I'm not only the CEO of the company, but the co-founder. And if you call the company, if you watch this program and you call us directly and you ask for me, I'm Lance Leonard. If I'm there, I will take your call. And
I got to tell you, people, when you call Lance, he is one of the most friendliest people you'll ever meet and the most knowledgeable people you're ever going to meet. And he always takes time. My patients, when they call, they just absolutely love how you take the time to explain things clearly and very succinctly so they can understand. I mean, you could talk like I can with all kinds of, very, very complicated medical terms, but you simplify it. And that's what I love about what you do. And so I want to thank you for that. And I think our listening audience will appreciate that as well.
Well, thank you for saying that. And it's one of the things that I appreciate about you too, as well. You have a great way of explaining complicated things and making them understandable so that people can say, you know what, this sounds good. I'm going to do this. And that's ultimately what we want. We want people to feel better and also to become empowered because, we all know that if we're old enough, we know that the ideas of what is supposedly healthy have changed over the years. But if you get down to basic principles and what you have to use a bit of common sense. You have to understand that nature itself has a bit of wisdom in it if we're just willing to listen and apply it to our lives.
Lance, that really segues into what I base everything that I do on. There's 3 major principles. Okay, number 1, common sense. You said it so well. That's so important. We've lost common sense today. And that's an element we have to get returned to when it comes to our health. Number 2 is science. We have to have evidence. We have to have things, grandma's remedies were great, but not all of them had benefits. And so if grandma's remedies have benefit, I'm going to really recommend them to people, but they got to have good science behind them. And lastly, we have to have cooperation with nature. That's number 3. Cooperating with nature, when we do, we're going to get great dividends and good health. And that's what spirulina does. That's what my product, the microbiome food, does. It really is something that we really got to get back to. And unfortunately, and we can go into another podcast, we could talk about this, and I'm sure you have some feelings about this too. What has just happened in the last couple of days, how the food pyramid has been flipped, in my estimation, is going to be devastating to the health of the American population. Because putting, steak and all the animal protein up on the top and flipping it, there wasn't a top before. Now it's the foods that they're saying you should have as the primary thing to be eating. And, there's short-term, again, benefits from doing these things, but the research is overwhelming the long-term hazards of eating a lot of animal protein and not getting loads of plant-based proteins and plant-based foods is going to be devastating to the body. It's what we've done to damage the foods. You know, people have been eating carbohydrates, whether it's whole grains or beans or legumes, for thousands and thousands of years. And it's what we've done to those carbohydrates by refining them and adding bad oils and sugars and all the chemicals that have really disrupted the food chain and caused so much disease. So I want to warn people, don't be duped by this new food pyramid. It's not going to last long. It's going to get changed, and when a new administration comes in, it'll get changed.
Well, you know, it's one of those funny things, isn't it? It's like we go from one extreme to another extreme, and really, in a way, it can also be used to cover up the real truth, which is what you just said, which is it's what we've done to these things that's the worst of it. You know, just like that old story about there's Wonder Bread and there's whole wheat fermented organic bread. You know, it's not bread itself isn't the thing. It's what we've done to it.
Sure.
And that can be applied to almost any of those foods. And then moderation too, like, which falls into that category of common sense. You know, health isn't just what we eat. We know that. We need to exercise. We need to sleep well. We need to drink good water. We need to stay in balance. We need to be happy.
You have a happy mindset. The mindset is so key to everything, you know?
Yes. I'll tell you my mantra. I think you'll like it. It's everything is working in my favor. And when I say that to myself every day, it's like an affirmation of, you know, this is a friendly universe. When I get in tune with it, I'll be in this kind of a flow, you might say, by just knowing that things are made to work in a certain way in nature. And we just have to listen to that. And there's always going to be crazy ideas generated by humans. That's the nature of humans, I think.
Yeah,
so,
but I want to really close with the fact that if you study the world's populations, cultures around the world that are healthiest population that have less than 1% of disease, these are called the blue zones. There's so much research on it. And these people eat primarily plant-based diet. They eat some animal protein, but it's in small quantities, but it's mostly plant-based diet. It's not only diet, they have the right mindset. They have communities of people that work together and live together and cooperate and support each other. Community is so important. They drink good water. They get daily activity. They're always moving their bodies. They get good rest. And, you know, these are all elements of living a healthy, independently healthy life. So, Lance, you've been a wonderful guest. I'm going to have you back again, I'm sure. So is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, I guess the only thing I would add is I like to throw in a dose of humor whenever possible, too, because it's
laughter's the best medicine.
That's right. So thank you so much for having me on again.
All right, my friend. We'll talk to you soon. Okay. And again, once again, anybody wants to get in touch with Lance, all you have to do is look in the description of the podcast, and you can get in touch with him. And again, he'll be happy to talk to you. And he's just really very, very knowledgeable. So thanks again, Lance, and take care.